Hi class, this is Patrick. I'm going to go through several things in this first video, the first of which is actually an extra credit assignment. I know that not every student is going to be interested in this extra credit assignment, and for those of you who are doing well in the course, I suggest you can kind of breeze through this portion of the video, but for those who are struggling, this is an option. Okay, so this, once again, this is optional, but it should be strongly considered for those who scored low on one or both of the quizzes. In this extra credit assignment, you're asked to utilize information from chapter 14, which is probably the one chapter we're really not going to get to, and explain what each of the three forms of price discrimination mean. So go through and kind of describe each of the three forms of price discrimination. Then on top of that, you're asked to provide one or two real-life examples of each form of price discrimination and explain why they fit as good examples. This analysis it should be written out and be 2 pages in length, and you may be asked to share your findings in our final class. We'll talk a little bit about price discrimination in the final class, but this will give us a real good opportunity to kind of go around the class, and maybe you guys can provide some information to students who may not get involved with this extra credit assignment. As far as points rewarded, if you do well on the project, you could be rewarded up to about 30 additional extra points on your lowest quiz grade, so it may be really worth considering for some students. I also want to take you through the answers to your homework assignment in this portion of the videos, and I also want to just briefly talk a little bit about chapter 10. Then we'll get into chapter 11 and chapter 12 in future videos. So let's start off with the homework assignments. The first question that you had or could have answered was from chapter 7. I'm paging my text to that. I'm going to go through the questions or the answers pretty quickly. Here was the question. Cypress River Landscape Supply is a large wholesaler supplier of landscaping materials in Georgia. Cypress River's sales vary seasonally. Sales tend to be higher in spring months than in other months. Okay, so suppose Cypress River estimates a linear trend without accounting for the seasonal variation. What effect would this admission have on the estimated sales trend? And the answer here is, if Cypress River sales vary cyclically, sales forecasts will be biased, and the cyclical variation is, if this is taken into account, in the figure that you see here, which I hope you can see at home, you have A, B, and C, and you have them estimated using a dummy variable to account for the seasonal variation. Parameters A apostrophe and B apostrophe were estimated without seasonal observations differently. In this situation depicted, the third time trend parameter B apostrophe is biased upward, and the trend line there is too steep. So I don't know exactly how you went about answering this, but as long as you're on the, kind of on this track, you should get full credit. Basically what you want to say is the omission of seasonal variance will overestimate the numbers and errors will exist in some sort of way. The second portion of the question asks, alternatively, suppose there is in fact no seasonal pattern to sales and the line is estimated using dummy variables to account for seasonality. What effect would this have on the estimation? And the answer here is, if regression includes a dummy variable when there is no cyclical variation, the estimates will be less precise and the degrees of freedom will be reduced. So anything along the lines of less precision would be an acceptable answer for that question. Let's move on to chapter 8. Your first question in chapter 8, just bear with me here for a second, I'm paging through, was the applied problems, and it's quite a lengthy question, so I'm not going to go through all the feedback on it, not the feedback, but the actual question. I'm not going to read through everything, but I'll read through 1A. It asks, what are the monthly fixed costs, quasi-fixed costs, and variable costs for exquisite portraits? And answers here can vary. So These are the correct textbook answers. I'm going to read through yours. I understand that you may have different answers, and that's okay. But, you know, let me read through your questions, how you answered them. There will be partial credit awarded. And we talked before, I believe, in class that quasi-fixed costs are going to be something that's going to really be, you know, the term quasi kind of means it's kind of a blend. So it's kind of an in-between type thing, and that's why these answers are going to vary. It's really a question to get you thinking more than anything. All right, so the textbook answer here is fixed costs would be $1,000 for the monthly lease payment for utility and lighting. The quasi-fixed costs, let's just define this. This is a lumpy or indivisible input for which a fixed amount must be used for any positive level of output, and none is purchased when output is 0. These would be $1,400 for rent on the office or studio, $45 per month for electricity, and $5,000 per month opportunity cost of her time. Now, you may have placed some of these in either variable or fixed, and depending on how you do that, you know, I'm going to have to read through how you went about that. The variable cost, according to the book, would be the cost of burning high wattage studio lights during the portrait shoots. Okay, so the next part was if the owner of Exquisite Portraits wants to close her studio and go out of business at the end of August, identify the sunk costs and avoidable costs. Business cards are sunk costs, $1,000 in Yellow Page listing is a sunk cost, and the business license is a sunk cost. The avoidable cost would be $1,400 in rent, $45 in electricity to run the office, and $5,000 opportunity costs. Some of you may have included others, and that's okay. So I'm going to have to take a look at what you put down. Part C. At the end of August, what role would the sunk costs play in the owner photographer's decision to go out of business? Here, all sunk costs should be ignored. That's one of the major themes in the chapter. Not only in August, but every time period after they are paid. The decision to go out of business in August should not be based in any way on her sunk costs, because these costs are irrelevant for decisions after being paid on January 1. Part D of the question asks, in making her decision to start her own business, would her decision have been more or less difficult if sunk costs were 0? This is once again more of an opinion type thing. Prior to starting her business on January 1, no costs are yet sunk. However, she knows that once she begins her business and pays the sunk costs, she can't recover these costs should she decide later in the year to shut down the business. Thus, she would view the sunk costs as the cost of entering the portrait business. The higher the cost of entering the business, i.e. the higher the sunk costs, the more difficult it will be for her to justify opening her own portrait studio, since she will lose all the sunk costs if she later goes out of business. That is the first question for chapter 8. The next question is number 4, and let me read this out here. After 2 quarters of increasing levels of production, the CEO of Canadian Fabrication and Design was upset to learn that during this time of expansion, productivity of the newly hired sheet metal workers declined with each new worker hired. Believing the new workers were either lazy or ineffectively supervised, the CEO instructed the shop foreman to crack down on the new workers to bring their productivity levels up. A. Explain carefully in terms of production theory why it might not matter the amount of cracking down in terms of increasing worker productivity at this particular firm. The answer here is that all sheet metal workers at this firm could be working as hard as they can, and the firm could still be experiencing diminishing productivity as suggested by the law of diminishing marginal productivity. And this is something we went over in depth in class. If the production increases at this firm were achieved without adding new machinery, then beyond some level of employment, marginal productivity of these metal workers will fall. The decline in productivity embodied in the law of diminishing productivity is not a result of worker laziness. Remember, the production function assumes technical efficiency, so a downward sloping portion of the marginal product curve cannot be caused by lazy workers or poor management of the workers. If the plant is technically efficient, no amount of cracking down on labor can increase productivity. Hopefully you got something along the lines of these underlined portions in this answer. Part B asked, provide an alternative to cracking down as a means of increasing productivity. here you could add new sheet metal working machines, which will cause the marginal product and average product curves to shift up. Workers will have more and perhaps better capital with which to work, thereby increasing their productivity levels. So that's chapter 8. Now you had the option of either doing chapter 7 or chapter 9. I do realize that, the editions of the text have changed. So chapter 7 used to be, that one question used to be a very long question. So I'm assuming most of you answered that one. But if you did go through chapter 9, I do want to take the time here to go through the correct answers for chapter 9 as well. Just bear with me real quick. Okay. So the first question here was number 3. How does the theory of efficient production apply to managers of government bureaus or departments that are run not for profit? How about the nonprofit clubs that collect enough dues from their members just to cover the cost of operations? The answer here is managers of government bureaus can still apply the principles of efficient production by employing inputs so to maximize their output. Similarly, managers of nonprofit clubs will want to maximize the provision of club services, given the club can't spend more than the dues collected from its members. The second question asked was on Moortex Company. I'll just go through the part A. The financial analysis department at Moortex estimates the price of a textile machine is $600 per day. Can management reduce the cost of assembling 5,400 units per day by purchasing a textile machine and using less labor? Why or why not? There's 2 different ways to do this. The hard way is first you get your labor, which is 5,400 units. Each worker makes 200 units, so there's 27 workers. You can do some math there to do that, as you can see here. You're paying each $50, so 27 times 50, you got $13.50 as your cost for the 5,400 units. In this scenario, you take that $13.50 over your 5,400, so it's 0.25 to produce. If you do the exact same type of mathematics for capital, you say it's 0.33 to produce, so on net labor is cheaper. There's an alternative way down here. It's a little easier. Here you just take the marginal product over the wage, which is 200 over 50, you get 4. Or you take that marginal product over the rent, 1,800 over 600, and you get 3. So on net, labor gives you more bang, marginal product, for your buck per dollar. So that's the first way to do that for part A. For part B, there's a variety of ways to answer it. I'm just going to go through these answers here. The hard way, you could go through and like we just did before, because this part B asks what would change if it increased $100 per day. So as you can see here, we're changing the $100 in that answer. It's still 0.33 down here, 0.5 there. But the easier way would have been just to stick with this technique. 200 over 100 gives you 2. 1,800 over 600 is still 3. So on net capital now gives you more bang for your buck. The final question was number 5 on Gamma Corporation, and the basic question asked, explain how the data provide evidence of efficiency. How could the new manager improve efficiency? Efficiency is marginal product over the dollar amount, and you set that equal to the marginal product of capital over the dollar amount. So here you have marginal product of labor over dollars, marginal product of capital over dollars. So in a sense, you're trying to find out how much bang for your buck you're getting. And you were provided with a lot of information: the marginal product of labor, the price of labor, marginal product of capital, price of capital. So if you take that marginal product of labor over that wage, which is, you would end up getting 0.5. And if you take the marginal product of capital over the price of capital, you get 1. These are not equal, so you know off the bat that they're not operating efficiency. In order to prove efficiency, the manager can increase the amount of capital used and decrease the amount of labor used. So we're going to end this portion here. Actually, before we do end this portion here, I did want to speak briefly about chapter 10 and just let you know, we're skipping this chapter. It uses cubic functions, which are slightly outside the realm of this course. That said, the chapter could be read and basically applies to what we've learned so far, explaining how to estimate cost curves in both the short run and the long run. The method they do in that chapter is regression. So in a sense, it's very similar to what we did in chapter 7, except roles are reversed because now we're really looking at costs and the supply side. So I explained this in class a little bit, but one area that was important to mention that's covered is issues with cost data and measuring cost. And really they talk about correcting data for inflation, which is something we talked about in macro. So it's another thing that I don't think is terribly important because we've already dealt with it in macro. As you know, you can deflate data into or inflate data using nominal or real terms. That was the major element that was included in that chapter that may be relevant going forward, but we had already talked about it in macro, so I don't think it's terribly important. I'm going to end here and we're going to go into chapter 11 when we return.